Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market.
Good morning, David, and welcome to episode number, drumroll, 19.
19.
Unbelievable.
Good morning. Yep.
And
Looking forward to it.
I heard this morning that you got some new hardware as well to improve the whole experience for everybody. So
Yeah.
that's exciting. And I guess, we both have to up antes a little bit, right?
Yep. I was told by my partner who's been looking at us and listening to us, Jonathan Hakoan, that the content is really good. You and Dave are doing a really good job. You're getting some good discussion going, great topics and everything. But it's one thing to listen to you, but he says, if we're going to look at you on YouTube or wherever else we have an opportunity to look at you, you got to up your game a little bit and get some better technology. And he got me a new camera and microphone to improve it. So now you can see me with all my warts and wrinkles and stuff. So he wanted me more in high definition. So I'm just following instructions, but hopefully it improves the quality. If anybody wants to look at our mugs.
Yeah, no kidding. Absolutely. And Dave, I think that trend is only going to continue going higher. And I think we're going to, Zoom and virtual conferences is here to stay. So I think we're going to see more of this, not less, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
so how'd the week go? What's going on in the market this week?
You know what? It's still, it doesn't seem like the market's stopping. The Bank of Canada last Wednesday announced that they're holding their target overnight rate at 0.25%. And, that's going to lead to just prices continuing to edge higher. It's going to lead to more money being available in the economy. It's going to lead to money still being extremely cheap and readily available in the marketplace. And we're going to keep seeing the same trends that we've really been seeing and that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. And in fact, we're seeing more and more of them happen. So we are seeing a little bit more properties come to the market, but everybody's holding back on. Lots of buyers still looking, a lot of people looking to invest, a lot of people looking to add properties to their portfolios, and there just isn't enough listings being listed. And even in the pre-construction world, I know we're going to get into our third part of pre-construction, but even the projects are being released by builders right now. It's about 1 to 6 for every available unit, meaning they are getting firm offers with bank drafts in hand, and they're getting 6 offers for every 1 unit available. And it's a trend that's prominent throughout the GTA. Beau Soleil was recently just launched. I think they're doing their allocations today. And, one of our agents has 80 worksheets with bank drafts available, and he's only probably going to have an allocation of about 10 to 12 units. So, out of the 80 people he has that are ready, willing, and able to go ahead and purchase a unit, there's going to be 68 of them that are going to be turned down, where they're not going to get a unit, and they're going to be forced to wait for the next project or phase 2 to open up, where the prices are going to be higher as well. So it's a trend we're seeing throughout the GTA, and it doesn't seem like there's any stopping it right now.
How do you as an agent pick and choose amongst your own clients when you've got that many people ready with bank drafts and want to get in on a project and you can't, right? And I wonder, I don't know, maybe you have an answer to the question, but how many of those are investors and how many of those are real users that want it for themselves?
That's a great question. I don't, because they're not my clients. They belong to one of our agents, but we can certainly ask those questions and peel back the layers. But I have a feeling when it comes to pre-construction, it would be a really good mix of both of them, right?
Yeah.
A lot of first-time home buyers probably trying to get into the market, but then a lot of seasoned investors who have bought lots of pre-construction in the past, who have made money, who understand the product, and who have disposable income available to invest into these projects as well, right? But as a builder, you always prefer end users to go into a building because it creates, a little bit of a better foundation and demographic base in the building as well. So when
Right.
you're a builder, you always prefer, end users going to take care of the property better. They're going to, respect the property more. They're going to invest and upgrade and put in light fixtures and do other upgrades over and above what the builder has provided. So, they're going to make sure that garbage is not thrown. If they see garbage in the floor, they're more likely to pick it up, right, than a tenant is. They care about the property more on a personal level.
There's no question, and and that's certainly applicable in the condo market, but it even applies on the the residential market as a whole. Any used residential houses, if there's a tenant been in there, we see it all the time. Like they trash the place, and when they leave, they don't clean up the way a homeowner would clean up, and people forget when they're a homeowner. It's not. They say, yeah, well, my tenant's going to be moving out and they're going to clean up. But no, you as the seller have to go back in afterwards and clean it up, because the standard is completely different. They do not look after the place the same way that an owner does, right? But on new construction, builders, they're happy to have a whole bunch of investors jump on early, usually because they want to get those sales going that we talked about last week to meet those thresholds. But then, like, you're right, they actually want people, homeowners living in the building. They'll have a mix of a certain percentage, but they need a lot of homeowners actually living in there.
They do, and then it changes, the atmosphere in the building as well. You're dealing with people who really care, who have a personal interest in the property, right? So it is a little bit of a different approach, and it creates a little bit of a different community feel. So I mean, that is definitely important. But when you're looking at 80 worksheets and only 12 available unit, I mean, that creates a huge supply and demand issue, right?
Right. That's really something. But as a whole, we're feeling like there was a little more supply that came on, in October, because we're sort of feeling it now with our numbers in November and December. Like our closing numbers, our volumes of closings in November and now leading into December are looking pretty strong. When October was, I think, the only month in the last 12 months that we actually ended up closing less files than we did a year ago. Like month over month, all year, we were, really close or ahead in most months, some months, by a lot. And October was the only one that in our office, we were actually had less closings than we did last October. But, there's reasons for that too. Last year, because there was a lull when COVID first happened, and things that would have normally happened in June, July, August sort of got pushed into the fall. So we were really, really busy in October. So it's not even fair to compare, because this year's October was still pretty good. But last year's October was sort of artificially incredibly busy for closings. And that translated into November and December being really busy. This year, I know we're going to surpass last year's November numbers. So that means there was things going on in the market September, October, pushing, with closings for us in November. So that's good. But I think overall, I think you're right. We need more supply coming on, and I think it'll set up for a really good spring, like it usually does.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would like to see more listings come in the market as well. But, the problem is, do you sell? Where do you go afterwards? I think in this market, buying is fundamentally more important, because you have to buy right?
Mhm.
And you can't overpay when you buy. And of course, you're going to get a great price when you sell. But again, making sure that those two transactions correlate and time really well. And if you buy right and you sell right, then you're that much ahead of the market, right? So I think it's fundamentally important to buy right, to make sure that you get into the right property, that make sure you have a place to live and to go. We're seeing people take a really long time to find the right house in this market and to be successful in buying the right house, just because it's tough to look your buyers in the face and say, hey, listen, there's 15 offers, and you have to pay $150,000, $200,000 over asking and over market, all over current market value. I mean, that's a tough conversations to have with your buyers, right? So we are seeing that cycle take a little bit longer. And I would strongly encourage people to buy first before selling your property in this market.
Well, good advice as always. Now, I know we want to get into our topic for today, because as you titled it, We're going to talk pre-construction part 3120409490303 because there's so many issues that come up on pre-construction. It seems like we can never finish the conversation. So I think we're already, talking about it for the third time to try and get through some of this. There's so many issues. It's such a different type of transaction than a resale transaction, and there's so many potential things that people have to be aware of. And we've talked about a lot of the issues, and we left a few of the issues to discuss today. So maybe we finish it off today and don't need another part.
A part 4 and 5. No, absolutely. Well, listen, let's jump into it. And I think today we're going to talk a lot about the two biggest items which agents struggle with, and that is assignments and HST and HST rebates, right? Really important topics. And again, we're seeing the record of pre-construction sales go to an all-time high. The city's building up. We're surrounded by Lake Ontario on the south side. There's a lot of conservation land to the north. And if people want to stay in the core, the city has to be built up. We're seeing it in Mississauga, we're seeing it in Burlington, we're seeing it in Grimsby. We're seeing a lot of high-rise construction, and this is the new trend. And I think that's here to stay. So I want my agents to be a lot more comfortable selling pre-construction, to really know the product. And a big part of that is understanding assignments, because I think while the condo is being built, there is going to be a lot of shifting, maneuvering, selling, and cross promotion. And I think it's going to happen more and more. That trend is going to be bigger and bigger moving forward, not smaller. So again, I'm really happy that we have a whole session devoted to these two topics. And assignments is going to be really, really important to talk to moving forward.
Yeah, well, before we get into assignments, I think it's worthwhile having a discussion on HST and how that impacts these new construction transactions, because that's where there's a lot of confusion. I see that with buyers, and I certainly see it with real estate agents. I see it with other lawyers too. There's a lot of lawyers that don't like dealing with these things, and they're hard issues, especially when you get into assignments. So we have to have a basic understanding of how the HST works. So what people are sort of surprised to know is that HST does apply to real estate transactions. Okay, HST is applicable. So on new construction, HST is applicable. What makes it confusing is people sort of know, and a lot of the agents that are out there know, that HST does not apply to used residential properties. It happens to be one of the exemptions. So the way the excise tax exactly works, HST applies to almost everything unless there's an exemption. So used residential property happens to be an exemption, okay, unless there's been a substantial renovation and sort of becomes a newer property, and then HST might be applicable. But for the most part, it doesn't apply. But on new construction, HST is payable on the purchase price. Now, the way the builders handle that, if they're selling a property for $1 million, let's say it's $1 million house, new construction, their agreements and purchase are set up with a clause in it that says that HST is included in the price. So you're paying $1 million, but that includes HST. Or a condo might be $500,000, but it includes HST. Okay, so it doesn't mean HST is not payable, but they're setting up that their price includes the HST. So the builder on their statement of adjustments will then set out, they'll back out the HST portion that they have to remit to the government, and the balance is the balance of the purchase price. But the buyer's still paying the $1 million if that's the price, because they're paying $1 million, which includes HST. So some people think, oh, there's no HST because I'm just paying $1 million, but no, there is HST, okay? So they have to understand that. The other issue is everybody's heard about that there's some sort of HST rebate available. So that is a totally separate issue from HST. HST is payable, HST has to be remitted by the builder, okay? The HST rebate is a program that's been around for quite a while now from the government. It was as an incentive to encourage the new construction market, to help out builders to get more out there and to help buyers. So that's a program that's available. and every agreement of purchase and sale will have a clause in it that says the buyer represents that they will be eligible for the HST new housing rebate, and they will apply for it on closing, and they'll assign the rebate to the builder. So the builder will actually get the money from the government for that rebate. And then the clause will go on to say, if the buyer's not eligible for that rebate, then the buyer will pay an amount equal to that rebate in addition to their purchase price to the builder. So let's just say the rebate, for argument's sake, is $25,000. Okay, so you sign an agreement purchase and sale, you're going to pay $1 million, and if you qualify for that rebate, then you'll sign some documents on closing, including an assignment to the builder. We send it to the builder sends that to the government will send the builder a check for $25,000. So the builder gets $1 million from the buyer, $25,000 from the government. Okay, if they're not eligible, then on closing there'll be a credit to the builder for that $25,000 in addition to the purchase price. So now the buyer is going to be paying $1 million plus $25,000 to the builder. So either way, the builder gets the same amount. It's just a question of whether they get it from the buyer or they get it from the builder. Okay, so then we have to look at eligibility for that rebate and how is a buyer eligible for that. Okay, so, and that's where people get lost a little bit. Basically, if you're an end user, if you're buying it for your own personal use and you're a Canadian citizen, you're going to be eligible for that rebate. Okay, now you can also have an immediate blood relative of yours move in. So if it's not me, but it's one of my adult children that's moving in, I can sign a declaration on closing to swear that it's going to be occupied by my daughter. And you have to put the name of the daughter and give information on that. And that would still qualify because it's got to be an immediate blood relative that's moving in. So you qualify that way. Okay. If you don't qualify, you're going to pay that HST rebate amount to the builder. Right? Now, for people that wouldn't qualify because they're buying it as an investment property, they would have to close on the basis they pay that $25,000 to the builder. Now, after closing, if they then rent the property out, there's another program called the HST Rental Rebate program, which is a rental program where you can basically apply to get that HST rebate that you paid to the builder back. So you have to rent out or lease out the place for at least a 1-year term. It has to be bona fide to a third party, and you've got to apply to the government with a different form that will show you did pay that amount. You didn't qualify, so you paid that rebate amount to the builder on closing. Now you've leased it out. Here's a copy of the lease. Here's a copy of my agreement purchase and sale. Here's a copy of my statement of adjustments. Here's the application. And some other documents. You send that to the government, and the government will send them back an amount. It's pretty much dollar for dollar for that $25,000 to reimburse them. Okay.
Wow.
So that creates a cash flow issue for investors that they have to be aware of. Okay, because on closing they got to lay out that $25,000, and then they got to apply after they lease out to get it back. It depends how long it takes them to lease it out. Depends how long it takes for the government to get around to processing it. But eventually they'll get it back. So it just creates a cash flow because you got to lay it out and then get it back. Okay.
So two very different programs.
Different programs, yep.
And two different ways of how the HST is paid or not paid when you enter into the transaction. So if you're an end user or immediate family occupies the unit and you sign a sworn affidavit, then it's a rebate program, right? Where you don't pay the money, the builder applies on your behalf and the government pays the builder directly, and you're not taking money out of your own pocket. The second program is the HST rebate for rental properties, where you're not eligible for the first program. You have to pay the builder at the time of closing the HST, and then you apply after you rent out the unit. You show a 1-year lease. You show that the HST was payable at the time of closing, and the government, after you submit all the paperwork, will rebate the HST to you. So in the latter, you have to pay the HST and you get it back from the government.
Right. So you know, and that's what investors have to be aware of. And sometimes that's the part they're not informed of. And then they're surprised on closing that they've got to lay out that 25,000. And I'll tell you something else, the way those clauses are drafted in most builder deals, it also gives the builder an out. If the builder suspects for any reason that it's not bona fide, that people are not moving in for their own purposes, for their own use, the builder will say, no, I'm not playing this game. We're not accepting the fact that, you know, you want this rebate credit on closing. So we're not going to do that. We're going to make you pay that rebate amount on closing. And then it's up to you as the owner buyer to apply to the government after closing yourself, which they can do. Okay. If they don't get it because the builder's not cooperating, they can apply after closing to the government, say, you know, here it is. I'm living there and I should be eligible. And I was always eligible. And here's the application. You apply yourself. So again, it creates a cash flow issue because you got to get that $25,000 in this scenario paid, and then you apply after closing to get it back. And I'll tell you, the government has become really strict on these things. When they first came up with the program, they weren't policing it that well. And then they realized a lot of people were taking advantage, and they weren't doing proper audits to see if people were eligible or not eligible. And I can't tell you the number of people that just, you know, lie to their lawyer about these things and pretend that they're eligible when they're not. And if we get suspicious of our own clients sometimes, which does happen, you know, I have a very heart-to-heart, frank conversation with them, and I said, you know what, like, it's fraud. You're to swear false affidavits to say that you're occupying it when you're not, and provide these documents and apply to get 25,000. Like that's fraud, and you won't look good in an orange jumpsuit. And you know, the government doesn't usually push it that far to a criminal offense, but it's certainly, you know, they'll claw back everything. We've seen that before, even when they've given the rebate and they find out, they'll investigate every single one of these now. They audit every single one now. And sometimes it could take them 5, 6, 7 years to get around to auditing. Yep. And when they do, and they find that you didn't live there, you weren't eligible, you got to pay it back
with interest and penalties.
With interest and penalties. And they could be, you know, they could, you know, what they probably should do is pull out a couple people and get more aggressive with them and consider charging them with fraud, because that might stop some of the games that people are playing to try and get away with this.
And it's not worth it, Dave. I mean, I know $25,000 is a lot of money, but a lot of these investors have made such a significant amount of money just by waiting 4 years for the property to be built that, you know, it's really not worth playing that game. You know, for me, you know, be transparent, be truthful, sleep at night, and you never have to look over your shoulders and wonder, you know, when that day is coming when the government does audit you. But we are seeing more and more of those audits as well. You know, we have requests for documentations, and we're hearing that those audits are happening as well. So, you know, great advice as always, Dave, from you and from your firm as well.
Yeah, and when they're auditing these things, like, they dig down deep. They want to see all your utility bills. Where are they being sent to? Are you paying them? Are they going directly to that property? Are they going somewhere else? They know where your driver's license says your home address is. They have other access to records to see if you own other property. They search your name to see if you own other properties. Okay. They look to see if you're leasing other properties. They really want to dig down to see where you're actually living, and they want all kinds of evidence and everything. Where's your mail going to? You know, your passport applications. Like, there's a lot of information out there that the government can access, even with privacy rights and everything. And they keep going, and they want to make sure that it's legit. So, you know, like, why play that game? So what we're finding is the ones that are still trying to play that game are generally the people that weren't well informed by their agents going into these transactions. They didn't have this discussion about it to understand the differences and understand what their rights are, and understand that if it is an investment property, there's a way to, you know, get that money back. And all of a sudden they're surprised at closing that they got to pay this 25,000. So they're scrambling and coming up with stories saying, oh no, I'm moving in, or my son's moving in, and it's, you know, and it's bullshit. And we, you know, they get caught on it sometimes, but they're scrambling. So a lot of times it comes to the misinformation or the lack of understanding. And that's why it's important for us to have these conversations. It's important, I do these webinars and seminars on these topics, for agents. The agents have to be well informed and understand these issues, because they're the ones that have to explain it to the clients. A lot of times by the time it comes to me, they've already signed, and we're having this conversation. If there's still a conditional period, if there's no conditional period, it's too late. A conditional period, if it was like a subdivision type of, a home, if there was a condition in the agreement. On a condo, we have a cooling off period, 10-day cooling off period that we talked about last week. So at least we get a chance to have those conversations. But it all comes down to information and understanding. And it's our role and your role to make sure the clients understand it. So, lawyers have to understand it, agents have to understand it, because we have to be able to explain it to the buyers.
100%. And I think the cash flow issue is the most damaging here. If you put yourself in the shoes of a potential investor that has multiple properties and multiple responsibilities and multiple closings, right? Another $25,000 can be a huge difference maker in terms of cash flow and being able to carry not only that property, but other properties and other obligations. So I agree with you 100% that you really need to be well informed as an agent, really understand these topics and be able to really communicate them as well to your clients, so they know exactly what's going on. And the other flip side of the coin, David, is how many investors out there didn't take advantage of this HST rebate program. And, this rebate is still available to them, and they don't even know that they can apply for a rebate if they have a lease for 1 year with an investor side, right? I mean, I bet you there's a lot of people out there that don't even know that this program exists and haven't yet taken advantage of it.
Yeah. And I'm sure that's true. I can tell you for a fact, anybody that closes a transaction through our office will be aware of it, because we'll have that discussion with them. Okay. We always want to know, right, when we take on a file, is this for you, or is it an investment? Because we got to set up the file properly. We want to ask the right questions and get the right information from the builder. And we just had one last week where we had a client buying 2 units in a project that was supposed to close 2 years ago. So it's been 5 years since they bought it. And they intended to buy, 1 unit for each of their sons, who would be adults at the time, and they are now, like, they're young adults. Like, I think one of them's still in university. But there was a lot of confusion, and partly on the client's fault, like, hoping their kids are going to move into it, but maybe not. So it might be investment, may not be investment. And we were scrambling last minute because, the builder was not giving them the credits, because the builder didn't have a clear understanding and thought it was purely an investment. So it was not giving them the HST rebate. And now the clients decided, like, literally 2 days before closing, no, our sons are moving in for sure. And not only that, we want to put the title directly in their names. So now we have to go back to the builder because they need an amendment to the agreement of purchase and sale. Fortunately, they were paying cash, so we didn't have to go and apply again for mortgage lending. But we had to convince the builder to do an amendment and then redo all their documents, and they charged pretty good fees, a fee just for dealing with it, like an admin fee, plus their lawyer's fees to redo the documents, to get it in their names. And the clients really didn't want to have to lay out the 25,000 in those examples on 2 units and then apply on their own afterwards. And we managed to convince the builder, basically because we had a good relationship with the builder's lawyer, because we've done enough units with them, that we weren't bullshitting with them, and they trusted we're giving the straight goods, and they managed to do their documents over, agree to give them the rebate, and so they got it on closing. And it was a mad scramble. And of course, our client was still complaining, well, the fees are so high, everybody's charging us legal fees for redoing it. And well, yeah, but the builder's lawyer is going to charge $500 to redo their documents. And we had to extend the closing a couple of days, so they charged an extension fee, a few $100s for that, and an admin fee, and then we got to charge additional fees because we're dealing with it too. So it probably cost them, an extra $1,000, $1,200 on each unit to get it done. But in the meantime, they saved the cash flow issue, and they could have done it after closing. They could have transferred it, but it would have cost a lot of money to retransfer the title and deal with it then. So even though it cost them some money, it was a real good result, but it was a bit of a mad scramble.
Well, it's a great example on a lot of different levels. First of all, again, relationships matter, right? Being able to explain and articulate that to the builder. If you didn't have that relationship, that could have been the end of the conversation. Listen, we're 2 days before closing. We don't,
Right.
We don't understand what you're doing with the unit, even though you're putting it in their names. Like, we don't know if that's just an attempt to circumvent the rules, right? But clearly there was a relationship there between you and your office, and the builder's lawyer, and then your office and the buyer as well. And, that was, you were able to clearly articulate that and put your relationship on the line for that to happen.
Yeah.
And look, 2 units, that's $50,000. Like, I mean, that's a lot of money. And even though that this particular buyer was paying cash, that's an extra $50,000 in cash that they had to come up with, which clearly they didn't feel comfortable, and I don't blame them.
Right. And look, it's way easier for the builder and the builder's lawyer to say no. Okay, we got enough of a suspicion about what's going on here, and we're not doing it. And you got to remember too, from their point of view, they're closing 300 units. They're doing final closings on 300 units in a couple days. Yep. It's way easier for them to say no, we're not going to do it, than for them to, have the people, even the lawyer's office, to redo the statement of adjustments, redo all the closing documents. And anybody that's been through a new construction closing, there's so many more documents than there are in a resale purchase. Like, there's just a whole bunch of documents you got to go through. So every single document has to be changed with the parties and the dates and everything. And the adjustments all have to be redone. Way easier to say no, no, we're closing. You got to pay it. We're not changing our documents. After closing, you can apply to the government, do what you want. You want to transfer title, you can do it after closing, transfer title to your sons. Good luck to you. We're not playing, right? So we got lucky there. And then, at the end of it, after we convinced them, then I get a call from the client, like, how come you're charging us so much in legal fees? You're charging us an extra $250 for an extension. I said, you're right. It shouldn't be $250. It should have been $1,000 for what we did.
Yeah, people don't realize how much work is involved, but you're basically starting the transaction from scratch. All the adjustments, all the paperwork, all the directions. There's a lot there. And then it all has to be edited and reprinted and redone and resent for signatures and recalculated. So, I mean, it does take a lot of work, and you're absolutely right. And when a builder is closing 300 transactions, much easier for them to say no. But, I want to think about the liability that that the builder faces on the HST issue from the government as well, right? If the builder tarnishes that relationship with the government, they're going to be under the scrutiny of the government under every single project that they do from that point forwards. And maybe they're going to be, they're not going to have the apply on their client's behalf as well if they get blacklisted, right? So from their point of view, they want to make sure that the laws are being followed by everybody, and they're not going to put their reputation on the line.
Right. That's a great point, David. And that's why if they're suspicious at all, they're usually saying no. We're not convinced that you're eligible. Good luck, do it on your own, right? Now, part of the standard assignment documents, when you sign the rebate, also includes an indemnity. So the buyer is indemnifying the builder in case this comes back from the government, okay? And it might be 5-6 years later when they get around to doing an audit, because they'll come back to the builder and they'll say, hey, you weren't eligible for that. We want the money back. And now the builder's coming after the buyer. And if there's a lawsuit or any legal fees incurred, the buyer is going to be indemnifying the builder for those costs as well. Okay, so it's not something you want to get dragged into. So you've got to have your agent's got to be doing their job explaining it to you. The lawyer's got to be doing their job explaining it to you, and really try not let you do it. And I've had a few examples in our office where we didn't trust what the clients were telling us, and we just weren't comfortable. And not only, I don't want anybody to sign a false affidavit. And if I really think that they're going to sign, and sometimes they're prepared to do it and take their chances, but if I have enough information where I think they're going to sign a false affidavit, we're going to say, sorry, we're not going to be party to this. You're happy to go down the street and find a lawyer that's going to turn a blind eye. And there's some people out there that say, okay, great, I'm going to do it. There's lawyers out there that I can refer you to a bunch, because they're, but they're not doing you any good.
No.
and they're not giving you the right advice. You might get your transaction closed, but we're not doing it. We don't want to be party to that.
Yeah, and I mean, the worst case scenario is that, you lie, you sign a false affidavit, and then a year, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years later, which is the worst case scenario, right? Because statute of limitations is 7 years. But imagine you get caught 6 years later and now you're paying penalties and interest for 6 years. And when the government assesses interest, they don't assess interest at 3%.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, that, that amount, that 25,000 over 6 years can double with penalties and interest to a really large and aggressive amount. So it's just not worth the headache. You're much better off to have, the right conversations, set the right expectations from your clients right from the day go. Show them how much money approximately is going to be needed to close their transactions on closing. If they are looking to invest, absolutely wonderful. They just have to keep in mind that it's going to cost them a little bit more cash flow up front, right? Before they get reimbursed from the government. But again, they will get reimbursed. It's just a matter of time and submitting the right documents and following the right procedures. And we even work with a third-party company that will apply for the HST rebate on your behalf. I mean, it's pretty straightforward to do the application, but if you feel intimidated, it's the first time you're going through it, we can connect you with a third-party company, and they actually specialize in applying for the HST rebates right from the government as well. So they make the whole process even smoother and even easier as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Now we used to do those in our office, and we still do the odd one. At one point we were doing them, and then we decided not to do them because it's a lot of work for very low fees. So you either got to be set up to do it or not do it. And we decided not to do it. Now the odd time, we're doing the odd application here or there, but for the most part, we're not. But it'd actually be worthwhile, I think, for us to get that third party on and join us in one of these podcasts.
Absolutely.
And they're really good because they're set up to tackle it. They know all the issues. They ask the right questions. They charge a reasonable fee. They're basically, paralegals or equivalent of it, and they can process these applications and get some money back for people. So that's a really good point. And just to confuse the issue more, to sort of lead into the next topic, there's two types of investors. There's an investor where they're going to own the property, keep it, and they're renting it out. And then you've got other type of investors who their intention is to assign it down the road to someone else. They're buying it 3 years in advance, 5 years in advance. The value is going to go up, and they never intend to move in. They don't intend to lease it out. Their plan was really to flip it and assign it. So we can get into that a little bit. And the first thing you got to consider again is what happens with this HST rebate. Okay.
Interesting.
So now when someone's buying it and they decide to assign it to someone else, before closing, is that new buyer going to be eligible for that HST rebate? Okay, so that person's the assignee. The one assigning it is the assignor. The one that's ultimately buying it is going to be the assignee. Is that new buyer, the assignee, going to be eligible for this HST rebate? If you do an assignment, that new buyer, assignee, is going to close the transaction with the builder. Okay. So is the eligibility going to be there? Now, it might be that the person ultimately buying it for their own use. They're going to live there. They're so excited. They're moving in for their family. It's their home. It's going to be their principal residence. So if they would have bought directly from the builder, there'd be no question that they would be eligible for the HST rebate. However, and this is where things get confusing, the way the act works on this, the HST rebate eligibility goes to the intention of the original buyer.
Really?
From the builder, yes. So if the original buyer intended to move in themselves, and everything that they've got showed they were originally going to buy it 3 years ago to move in themselves for their own use, and then they assign it because circumstances change, but the evidence would always show that would have been the plan, then the new buyer would still be eligible for that. But if it was always bought by the first buyer, the original buyer, as an investment property and they never had an intention to move in, and it was always either to rent out or it was to flip, then the new buyer is not going to be eligible for that HST rebate.
Wow.
So this is a big issue that comes up when you're doing an assignment, okay? Because it goes to the intention of the first buyer, not the second buyer, which I don't really understand because it doesn't make logical sense. You know, if the first user of the property is eligible for the HST rebate, why wouldn't it be available? But it's not the way it works. It goes to the intention of the first buyer. So
Wow.
if you're acting for that ultimate buyer that's taking the assignment, we want evidence and declarations from the first buyer, the assignor, that they did intend to use it, that at all times it was supposed to be yours and their circumstances changed or whatever. And because we need that in support of an application for the ultimate buyer to get the rebate. Now, builders sometimes, again, don't want to play this game. They don't want to look into all this. So a lot of times when the builders are consenting to these transactions, because we talked about that last week, you always need the builder's consent on an assignment. Okay. Usually there's a clear prohibition against assigning, but the builder says, okay, if I do assign, I'll allow you to assign it on certain terms and conditions. One of the conditions is generally that they're not going to give the HST rebate to the assignee on closing, because they don't want to play the game whether there was eligibility or there wasn't eligibility. So a lot of times they say, yeah, we'll consent, but we're not going to give you that HST rebate on closing. So we'll close with the new buyer, but they're going to lay out that $25,000, and it's up to them to apply afterwards to get it back. And they may not get it back. Their eligibility will be clear, but they may not get it back if there isn't evidence that the first buyer would have been eligible. So how's that for muddying the waters?
That is just blows my mind, because I'm trying to formulate and kind of structure, how do you know, like, other than a signed declaration from the assignor, how do you really know what their intention was? And I'm going back thinking to a lot of builder paperwork. There really isn't any questions in there or anywhere for you to really write or declare, show your intention as to what you're going to do with the unit, other than possibly some background conversations between the salespeople and your agent when you're representing that particular buyer.
Right, but sometimes there's some pretty clear evidence available to show that you're not eligible. If someone's buying more than one unit,
right?
Okay, if they might have a history of buying a bunch of units in different places, right? Like some are pretty seasoned veterans on these assignments. So if you're an agent dealing with this, you've got to understand this and you got to know it, and you've got to have that conversation with your assignee buyer, even though they want to live on their own, saying, you may not be able to get this HST rebate. Okay, it may not be available. So you're gonna have to pay this amount on closing, and you may not get it. We may not get enough information that the government's going to be satisfied that the assignor did intend to buy this for their own purposes. So they have to be prepared to pay that amount, or there has to be a negotiation with the assignor saying, that the assignor is going to credit them with that $25,000. It's going to be reflected as part of the assignment price that they're paying, because that money's got to be paid by somebody. So it has to be part of the negotiation. If they're not eligible, if they're not going to get this rebate, it's going to change the pricing on the assignment by the amount of that. So is that going to be the assignor's responsibility, the assignee's responsibility? They're going to split it, but it's got to be part of the conversation in the negotiation.
At the very beginning, yeah.
Right at the beginning, which makes these assignment transactions really complicated. Just on that issue alone, they get complicated. Okay.
Right.
Now, and that's just one of the conditions that a builder generally imposes, saying, okay, we might consent to an assignment, but we're not going to give anybody the HST rebate. Don't try and convince us otherwise. You're on your own to figure that out. So that's one hurdle you got to get over. We talked a little bit last week that they always charge a fee for granting a consent to an assignment. And we've seen that fee range anywhere from, a couple $1,000 up to $50,000.
Really, $50,000.
$50,000 on one project. We had a client that paid $50,000. Okay. And on the same project, a few days earlier, we had another client that paid a $3,000 fee to the builder. And we went back to them and say, how come you charge this client $3,000? How come you're charging that one $50,000? Well, because we can. And there were circumstances while we were able to do it for, they knew the other person, they trusted the other person, they did it for $3,000. But for this client, we're not budging. It's $50,000, and the client paid it.
Wow, that just boggles my mind. I mean, so many issues come to mind, but that is insane. From the same builder, same project, just two different buyers.
Right. So
because they can.
So again, it's important for an agent to know that, important for lawyers to know that if the language in the assignment clause is open-ended, that says if we consent, the buyer's going to pay a fee, an administration fee to the builder and pay for the builder's legal fees, that's different than if you pin it down as to how much is that going to be.
Right.
That it won't exceed a certain amount, put a cap on it, or actually get them to state an amount. So if you know it's going to be $5,000, then you factor that in to your assignment deal, right? If it's open-ended, you're taking a risk because you're not going to know what that number is going to be until you're in the middle of an assignment transaction. Right. And all of a sudden, they thought they were going to have a profit of a certain amount, but now it's that profit less $50,000. Okay, and there's also negotiation. Who pays that fee? Is it the assignor that pays that fee, or is it the assignee that pays that fee? Whatever it's going to be. Usually it's the assignor because they're the one going to apply for the consent, but it's not always, and that can be part of a negotiation too, especially if you're on the assignee side and it's open-ended. You don't know what that number is going to be. You don't want to take that risk that you might be paying for that or splitting that or something when it's open-ended. The assignor as well. So, these are things that have to be considered when you're signing an agreement to purchase sale up front with the builder to see if there's an opportunity to negotiate on any of that. And then for sure, when you're doing an assignment transaction, you got to factor all that in. Maybe you can get in touch with the builder then saying, what's your rate right now for granting an assignment consent?
Yeah.
Right. You want to build that in.
And again, I can't help but think, how much relationships matter in these situations, right? Like if you have a relationship with a lawyer that's representing the builder and you have a great relationship and you've worked that office over and over and over, and you make the call and, as opposed to a law firm that they've never heard of where, perhaps they're being pushy or they're rubbing the builder the wrong way or they're sending too many emails, what's that response going to come back like for both offices? And who would you rather be represented by?
Right. And sometimes it's, it's supply and demand and how many requests they're getting at the time and whether they can deal with it. And certain projects, like, have all kinds of investors, a high percentage of investors, and others are more end users. So it depends on how many of these requests the builders are getting as well and what the project is. But generally, they'll have policies in place and have their marching orders from the builder as to what they're going to agree to and what they're not going to agree to. But you cannot move ahead with an assignment until you get the consent of a builder. I've never seen a agreement purchase and sale that gives someone the absolute right to assign without imposing some conditions on a consent. And that consent is a three-party document that has to be drafted. It's usually drafted by the builder's lawyer. And it's a three-way agreement between the builder, the first buyer, who's the assignor, and the second buyer, who's the assignee. They've all got to sign the same document, which provides the consent to the assignment. It lists some of these conditions, which will say, you got to pay the fee to my lawyer. You got to pay us an administration fee. We're not agreeing to any further assignments. There's usually something like that in there. There won't be an HST rebate. Don't bother even asking us for it. That's usually a condition of it. So, and that has to be negotiated out between the three parties, but it's not much of a negotiation. It's like, it's more of a dictation.
You're being told and
it's
you're
more of a dictation, right?
Yeah.
Here's our form and you got to get it signed.
Yeah. I think the most important thing to know, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, but the original buyer would most likely always be liable if the transaction does not close. when you're dealing with builder assignments. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's a fabulous point to make up. I'm glad you raised that point, because the assignment, the consent to an assignment, this three-way document will always have a provision in there that even though we're consenting to the assignee, we'll close with the assignee, the new buyer. Okay, we agree to do that, and we'll deal with them directly and their lawyer directly, which effectively cuts out the assignor, the first buyer, and their lawyer from the process. But if the assignee doesn't close, the assignor is still responsible. The first buyer is still going to be responsible for it. They will not release the first buyer until it closes. Okay, now usually there's that type of clause in the agreement of purchase and sale to start off with, when there's that prohibition against assignment. It'll say even if and when we actually do consent, we're never going to release
The original
the
buyer.
buyer.
Yeah.
It'll for sure be in the three-party agreement where there won't be that. Okay. And again, that's another place where assignments get tricky, because now once you consent, once there is this consent agreement signed by the three parties, now the builder's lawyer is going to deal only with the assignee's lawyer and send them the adjustments, send them the documents. Sometimes as the assignor's lawyer, we don't even know when they're closing. And sometimes these are moving targets. The dates keep getting extended. We don't know when they're closing, but we still have an assignment transaction to close. We still got to get some money out of our closing. And we don't have a way to follow what they're doing. And the builder won't talk to us anymore, and their lawyer won't talk to us anymore. So another thing that we always try and negotiate in our assignment agreements between the assignee and the assignor, when you're doing an assignment transaction, is we have to have a clause in there that the assignee has a responsibility to keep us informed and keep the assignor and their lawyer knowing what's going on and send us copies so we know when their closing is going to be, so they don't close without us. Okay, because most assignments, we're not getting all the money back for the original buyer until they finally close with the builder. And the basic reason for that is that the buyer can't get all their mortgage funds until they have their final closing with the builder. And usually they need their mortgage funds to finish paying off the assignment transaction as well. So we've seen transactions, we've seen other lawyers involved in transactions where they're totally left in the dark. They don't know when the transaction's closing, the date moves up or the date gets extended. Transaction closes with the builder and they've never closed their assignment because no one told them that this was happening. So I'll tell you, assignments are tricky. They're really tricky.
Yeah. A million questions for you.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to talk about, people listening, like they're probably thinking to themselves, like, what is the benefit of an assignment? Like, why are we even talking about this, right? And the major benefit is that the original buyer doesn't actually have to go through the process of closing in order to, resell the unit and turn a profit, right? It's an exit strategy that eliminates a lot of legal fees and eliminates land transfer tax, right? Plus it eliminates the headache of dealing with this HST rebate.
Right. And and land transfer tax is a pretty significant amount right there. Okay. 100%. I wish the legal fees was a more significant amount, but it's not. but the land transfer tax, certainly is a big amount. So you'd rather not close if you can avoid it. You're closing, there'll be legal fees, are more marginal, and the disbursements for closing, that'll cost you a couple $1,000, but the land transfer tax could be really significant savings. So you'd rather have an assignment and let the builder close directly with the assignee, and that way it's not payable. So, that's a great point. Now, if you don't get it, you can always sell your property after closing. Once you have ownership to it, you could do it, but you're paying that land transfer tax, you're paying all that. And, and land transfer tax is paid on every transaction. Same property can flip 3-4 times in the same year. Government gets land transfer tax every single time, single time.
It seems punitive, but I mean, same issue applies to, when you're buying a brand new car and paying HST, right? You can buy and sell a car 10 times in a year and pay HST every single time the car is bought and sold. And sometimes when that happens, the value of HST surpasses what the initial cost of the car was over the lifetime, right? So I mean, it seems punitive, but that's the law. And, we live in a great country. We enjoy a lot of different services, and this is how the government pays for it.
Well, I'll throw one other point in, because I know we're running a little bit short on time on this. And we've talked about HST, we talked about HST rebates. HST comes back another place on an assignment transaction because HST is payable on that profit. If it's assigned for a profit, okay? So
one more time.
Sorry?
Say that one more time.
Okay, if you buy a unit, the original buyer paid $1 million.
Right.
Now they're assigning it to somebody else with the consent of the builder, et cetera. And let's say the new buyer's paying $1.2 million
Okay.
for the property. So you have a $200,000 profit that's going to go to the assignor, basically, aside from adjustments and other costs, et cetera. There's HST is payable on that to the government on that profit. Now, to make it worse, like that's sort of clear that HST is payable on a profit. It's just, HST is payable on everything unless there's an exemption. So the government wants HST on that. They're not charging HST on the first $1 million because they're actually already getting it. Remember from the first part of the conversation, they're actually getting it as part of that $1 million. So now they want it on the other 200,000. So that's pretty clear. What confuses a lot of people, the government's being even more aggressive. Like normally on an assignment, the original buyer would have paid certain deposits, something that's a series of deposits. So maybe they've paid $100,000 in deposits on their $1 million purchase, okay? So when you're doing an assignment transaction, part of the transaction is the assignor wants their $100,000 back from the assignee. So that's built into the assignment agreement of purchase and sale. They get their deposit back, plus they're going to get a profit of $200,000. The government's being aggressive with this, and they're saying, we want HST on that $100,000 as well, on the deposit amount that's being paid on the assignment transaction, which makes no logical sense to me. It hasn't been fully adjudicated through the court system, because I think ultimately the challenge, to me, it makes sense. They shouldn't be getting HST on that. But they've been really
punitive in nature. Right. I mean, it was already paid for, and
they're getting HST on it. They're already getting it. So they're double dipping as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not a tax expert. I don't give tax advice. But to me, on the face of it, it looks like they're just double dipping, but it hasn't been fully challenged through the court system. Right. And they're aggressive. And so the answer is it's probably right now it's payable on the deposit amount, which is ludicrous. So again, when you're doing an assignment transaction, you've got to take that into account, that HST might be payable on that first $100,000 as well. So you got to build that into your negotiation too. And it's really a hard thing to explain to people, because even to me and to you, I could see by your reaction, it doesn't make sense. But yet that's the position CRA has been taking on these things. And until there's a final decision through the courts, I think that they're going to keep taking this aggressive position.
Wow. David, how do you handle commissions in an assignment? Like, let's say there's an agent involved, builder pays 4% to the original agent, then, the agreement is assigned. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. So the second agent, they get paid 2.5% on the whole amount?
Well, it depends what's negotiated. And again, on the assignment transaction, when the parties are going to be signing an assignment of agreement of purchase and sale, there's usually a deposit paid as part of that transaction too. So when there's an agent involved, that deposit will go to the assignor's agent in trust, just like in any transaction. The commissions are generally paid out of that if there's enough, or there'll be directions, to pay the balance out of closing proceeds, just like on any transaction. But that's part of the negotiation. Are they earning commission just on the profit portion or on the whole transaction? I think to me, it's a whole transaction. There's assignments all the time where there is no profit. Okay, and there's still, and I've seen assignments where there's actually a loss for the original buyer, but they got to get out of the deal. They can't close the deal, or they're moving on, or whatever, or the values may have just gone down on a particular new home over time. It does happen occasionally, and it's happened in a few subdivisions in recent years, more of that than in the condo market. But in the condo market, there's been examples of that too. So sometimes people are actually doing an assignment at a loss position, or or just get my money back. I'm happy to not make a nickel if I can just get my money back and move on, right? but commissions should still be payable. It's a lot of work for an agent.
It is.
Honestly, it's a lot of work. Like these are hard deals to negotiate and do properly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. I just kind of look at the margins, right? Like, let's say it's $1 million original purchase sold for 1.2. By the time you pay all the assignments, by the time you pay HST, by the time you pay the 4% or the 2.5% to the agent, it really eats into some of those margins.
Right.
But again, it's something that you have to be aware of. It's something that you have to calculate and really understand. And putting together an assignment APS on the assignment forms. I mean, it's there's a lot of issues that go into play there. The original deposit, the original purchase price. There's a lot of calculations. The additional deposit, right? The assignment fees and who pays what. There's a series of calculations that need to happen, and really important that you go through those calculations very carefully.
Right. Who's responsible for all the adjustments with the builder? Were there any incentives that were given to the original buyer? Sometimes they can't be passed on an assignment. We see that too. Like sometimes a builder will say, just as an incentive, we're on a condo project, you won't have to pay your monthly common expenses for the first year after the final closing. And then you read the fine print, it says, but that right's not assignable. Even though if we grant a consent, you can't assign that right. That's worth, 12 times whatever the monthly amount is, 12 times $500 or something like, that's money that has to be negotiated on the table too. So see, there's all kinds of issues. If you are an investor type of person on this, there's capital gains tax that might be applicable on the profit. You got to factor that into it. There's a lot of issues that have to be dealt with on assignment transactions that make them quite complicated. And that's why a lot of agents don't want to touch them. And there's a lot of lawyers that will not do them. We get referrals all the time from other lawyers saying, this assignment came in, we don't want to do it, or I don't have a clerk that'll do it. I don't want to touch it. Can you guys do this? And we'll do it. And I've got some clerks within our office that just hate them and won't do them. And then others that have doing nothing, that they're really comfortable and I'll take it. So fortunately, we got a bunch that will do them, but I've got a few that just say, no, don't give it to me. It's too many issues. I find it too confusing and I don't want to do it. So they're not easy. Like they're not easy.
They're not easy, but I mean, I think they're here to stay. And I think moving forward, especially looking at our supply issues, I think there's going to be more and more demand for assignments, especially from buyers that want to get into the market, that don't want to compete in multiple offers, that don't want to stand in line for 48 hours looking for allocations. I think looking at assignments is a very viable option. I think it's here to stay, and I think as a realtor, you really have to understand them. You really have to know them. As a brokerage, you really have to understand and know them, and have a place where you can advertise them, have a place where you can really showcase them as well, and encourage agents to look at them as a viable options for some of your buyers.
Right. And it's those agents that are doing them, like it's 2 transactions each time, because they've got the original transaction and they've earned a commission on that. And now we've got an assignment transaction. So, that's pretty good. And a lot of people that are in that market are investor types of people that are looking to buy early on these projects as they come up with an opportunity to assign. So it could be, really lucrative from an agent's point of view. And like you said, they're here to stay. They're not going away. Just because they're difficult and just because a lot of issues doesn't mean they're not going to be done. They're still worthwhile. There's still enough money in it for everybody to figure out how to do it, get them done properly, negotiate it all properly, and get them done. So look, there's a big market for these things. Yeah.
And I mean, there's a really big niche market as well. Like if you're an agent that does a lot of pre-construction sales, I strongly encourage you to go back to all those people who transacted with you 3, 4, 5 years ago, where these transactions haven't closed yet, and see if you can, find a buyer, do the
Right.
connections, right? Talk, use your brokerage, go talk to your broker manager, your broker of record, and see if maybe there's a closed Facebook group where you can start advertising some of these assignments to and connect them with buyers. Like, there's a huge opportunity here for business, right? Like, look how many people are losing in multiple offers, right? Like we said, 15 offers on the table, that means there's only one winner and 14 losers, right? Those 14 losers still need a place to live. They
Right.
still need a place to invest, right?
Right.
And assignments are a great, valuable option, and connect those buyers and sellers, and turn that one transaction into two, turn those two transactions into four. That's how we're gonna really get to that next income level as agents, and help more people and be rewarded.
Yeah. And here's a way of looking at it too. Like, David, do you know where you're going to be living 5 years from now?
No idea.
You might be where you are, but do you know where you're living 3 years, 5 years? People are buying these units, sometimes legitimate purchasers for themselves. They're excited. There's a new condo going. This is where they want to live. They check it out. They're going to be moving in. It's supposed to close in 3 years, right? Turns out it gets extended. There's material shortages, supply shortages. The construction schedule's off, and instead of closing in 3 years, it closes in 5 years. It happens all the time. Pandemic, no pandemic, it happens all the time. Projects get delayed. Subdivision homes too, they get delayed. That's why there's all these provisions, these Tarion provisions we talked about last week, that give extension rights and unilateral extension rights and things like that. It's a routine thing. So a lot of times there's legitimate buyers that thought, okay, 3 years from now, I want to move into this place. And then it turns out it's 5 years later, and life changes, circumstances change, and they don't want to close on it. And it's not where they want to live. And it's changed. And now they have an obligation to close on it. Or through my fabulous agent who had a discussion with David Gorski, he suggested, you know what, you don't have to close. There's another option. We can look to get an assignment. And you don't have to close, and let's look at assignment. The value hopefully went up, and we can do the math and figure it all out and apply to get it. And you got another option. And this happens all the time. Like, with people that legitimately had one plan, 3 years later, 5 years later, life changes. They got a different job. They want to live in a different part of the city. They met someone, like there's all kinds of circumstances. So, as an agent, circle back with these people and find out what's the story, because the earlier you get on an assignment and ask for a consent to assignment, the better.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a huge opportunity here, David. Like, I mean, even if you weren't the agent who sold that pre-construction condo at the very beginning, this is your chance to educate these investors that bought these units that there is a different way, a different exit strategy, right?
Yeah.
And help them achieve it. And the next pre-construction condo, maybe they're going to buy it with you and not go back to that agent that they used before, because of the advice and of the help and of the instructions that you were able to give them, and the exit strategy that you presented. You saved them money in legal fees. You saved them HST.
The land transfer tax.
You saved them land transfer tax. You were able to help them navigate and connect them with a great accountant who gave them great capital gain advice, right? You made the transaction really smooth and connected with them with a buyer. And before they knew it, their money is locked, it's now freed up, and they're on to the next project, and they're on to the next project with you, because you were that professional that really embraced this niche, gave them the right advice, put out a video, used a lot of the contents that we presented here, and really accelerate your business to the next level.
Right. And another point, if they have to close first, and they're not doing an assignment, if they close, in addition to land transfer tax, usually they're getting mortgage financing to close. So now they got to get a mortgage short term, because their intention is to get rid of the property. So now they're paying high fees and high interest rate for a short-term mortgage, or a mortgage that's going to have costly prepayment privileges, because they got to get out of the mortgage on a short-term basis, right? So there's a lot of expenses that get incurred if you do close a transaction versus the assignment side of it. So you've got to get proper advice, from an agent, from a lawyer that understands these things and can work through all the nitty-gritty, because there's a lot of issues, but it's worth the effort. It's worth the
100%.
effort.
No, I'm excited, Dave. I always look at, all these conversations that we have as a business development opportunity. And, I think there's a big area of opportunity here for agents that actually embrace this as a method of doing business. And, I think it's all about educating your clients. I see so many agents sell pre-construction, but sometimes taking a step back and saying, okay, you know what? Let me approach in a different way. And maybe I don't want to catch the customer here, but maybe I want to catch the customer here, help them exit, go into another project, and then everybody wins.
Right. Right. So great advice, great opportunity. I'm not sure if we finished our discussion or if we got to do it again next week. There's certainly more issues that come up on the assignment side. I'm sure we'll circle back to it. And maybe we'll get that third party involved in one of these podcasts to discuss some of these issues and how they process, the HST rebate issues and things like that. So I think it's certainly worthwhile circling back on this in a future podcast too.
Absolutely. And today is a big day, David, because I am showing a $7.2 million condominium to my mentor. I did a preview of it yesterday. So I walked through, I took a look at where the parking is, took a look at all the amenities, and I can't wait to show it to him later on today. So I'll keep you guys posted how that goes. But, there's a lot of amazing, and you know what, this agent from Harvey Callis that lists all the pinnacle penthouses for sale. I mean, we had a conversation and we were talking about Toronto real estate and really what has happened in the last 10 years to Toronto real estate, and it's just absolutely insane. All the new buildings, these builders are competing for having the tallest building in Toronto. And the next, building that's being released, I think is scheduled to be over 100 stories high.
Wow.
Yeah. And here we were on the 54th floor. And David, I'm looking around and I counted at least 6 or 7 other buildings in the vicinity that were higher than the 54th floor.
Right. That's unbelievable.
Who would have thought 10 years ago that we're building this high? But the technology is changing. They have stronger foundations and steel and concrete, and they're understanding building materials more, and the trend's only going to continue to build up.
Well, I'll tell you a quick story about how it changes. When I was a kid, I think I was 14 years old playing soccer, and my soccer team was in the Canadian Championship. And we were playing a team from Saskatchewan that came in, and we were billeting a couple of the players at our house. So this is going back a few years because I'm a few years older than you. And at the time, downtown, the TD Bank complex had just been built. So those were the biggest buildings in Toronto, the 3 TD Bank towers, and maybe they weren't even all there. And what are those? They're around 50 stories or something like that. So those are the biggest buildings in Canada at the time. So we're living in North York, and I remember my dad said, let's take these boys downtown and show them. Like they said, what's the highest building in your city? And they said, oh, it's apartment, it's about 6 stories or something. Like they're from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, where John Diefenbaker was from. So small town, and somehow this team won the Western Canadian Championship to qualify, which was pretty impressive because they're a small city. We're going to take them downtown to show them these buildings because it'll just blow their minds. They've never seen anything like it. So we start driving. We're 5 minutes from our house, and we get to Bathurst and Shepherd, and there's an apartment complex there, about 6 buildings that are like 18 stories high. So we're just driving past that, and these guys are going, "Oh my God, look at these buildings! We've never seen something like so big." Like, oh my God, like this is downtown Toronto. No, like we're in the suburbs. We're at Bathurst and Shepherd, but they were already impressed by these 18-story apartment buildings. But that's all there was. Like you had buildings like that, and then TD Bank towers were built, 50 stories, and now look what they're built. Like, can you imagine they can double that?
Oh, they can. Like, I mean, look at Abu Dhabi. I don't know how tall the tallest building in the world is, but I mean, I think it's something like 200 and something stories. Like, I mean, it's massive, right?
Like, how long is that elevator trip up?
Oh, I don't know, Dave. But I mean, it's almost like a city within a city within a city. Like, I mean, a 200-story building. I mean, imagine the base, right?
Yeah.
Um, you have to fill it. You have to fill each and every apartment. I think the first, number of stories are office buildings. Like the first two stories is retail, and they've done some beautiful things. And it's all coming here slowly but surely. It's coming here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something. But you go downtown and you just see all the cranes, right? You see how much construction is going on. You go to places in Mississauga, middle of Mississauga, you see all the cranes. Vaughan is going crazy with these condo projects going up near where the subway extensions were.
Yeah.
There's lots of activity. The condo market is booming, and it's going to continue for the foreseeable future because it allows more people to live in the, closer to the city by just building up. So we're going to have lots of conversations about that and market conditions on the condo side as we go forward with these things for sure.
Yeah.
But
just before we end it, all I wanted to say is that Vaughan is doing it right, though, right? Because what Vaughan did before they started building all these skyscrapers is they heavily invested in infrastructure. So subway,
right,
dedicated bus stations, and they invest into like one central hub where all the transportation comes in, and then they're building around it. So I give Vaughan a lot of credit. I think that's how any city should expand. I think, Mississauga did it backwards a little bit, where now, we have so much volume that the streets are so packed. Now they're trying to build an LTR on Ontario Street. I would have loved to see all that going first,
yeah,
and then start building it up. So
yeah.
A lot of credit goes to Vaughan. A lot of credit goes to Smart Centers for really working collectively with the city, donating land for the subway, doing a lot of strategic planning. And I think we're going to see a lot of smart money going and investing in that city, just because, they're really expanding and doing it correctly, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're bringing in, high density buildings. They need the infrastructure. They need the schools, they need the parks, they need all that stuff, the transportation, but they also need retail. They need grocery stores. They need to be able to get accessible places. They need the dry cleaners. They need all the, the general retailers you need in any community, and they've got to be able to get to it, by walking or by public transit or something. It can't be miles away. And that's what happens sometimes in the GTA. They're just building these towers with nothing else in mind, and where are people getting their groceries and all that stuff, and where's the convenience store? So they're doing a much better job of planning these things out. And I think you're right, Vaughan seems to started with the right way, like with the infrastructure first, and then look, any place you're building a subway station, you're going to have massive growth right around it.
100%. And it's all high density, like they're building up right next to the subway stops, and that's solving a lot of issues, solving a lot of parking issues, solving a lot of car issues, encouraging people that live in these condos, maybe not to have a car, right? Which is something that no suburb has been able to accomplish because of, how far everything is from each other. But, Vaughan's doing it, and they're doing a great job. So I give them a lot of credit.
Yeah. We can keep going on this, but I think we've gone pretty long for today's session.
We have, yeah.
So we should probably cut it and save something for podcast 20.
Podcast 20 coming up next week. Everybody, thanks so much for joining us. David, I think today was a great session. I hope everybody enjoyed as much as we did. And, wanted to wish everybody a great week. Stay safe, sell lots of real estate, and really learn assignments. Really encourage you to learn assignments and look at pre-construction as a very viable option. It's here to stay, and the trend's only going to keep increasing with time.
Great advice as always, David. Looking forward to next week. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Talk to you guys soon.
Yep.
Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market and dive deep to understand the issues affecting buyers, sellers, investors, and businesses. If you love real estate as much as we do, sit back, relax, and gain an insider's edge to the exciting world of real estate. David Gorski is a broker and the owner of Sutton Summit Realty, a powerhouse brokerage providing guidance to over 180 realtors. And David Korman is a partner at Kormans LLP, a respected law firm specializing in residential and commercial real estate transactions, with offices located in Toronto, Mississauga, and Markham.